I'm glad they did for me. Thanks, Steve. Let's go. Go ahead, please. Okay, my history, I've been in the villages, we've been in the villages about close to 15 years now, renting and owning. We owned a house with a tornado hit at Mallory, but we're now in Bonita, and we love it. We love the villages. We've made a lot of friends, and we have a good time. A lot of my friends are here. I recognize some familiar faces, neighbors, golf club buddies, and so on. My education, a formal education, college, Carnegie Mellon University, and then my real education was being in the Army, working in my father's restaurant, and working my way through school in the steel mill. That was the real education. Today I get my education from my kids and grandkids, who teach me all about all the things I didn't know about iPhones and Netflix and all that stuff. Go ahead, Steve. They're wonderful. I don't know if you can see this that well, but this is a cartoon because I'm here because I was with Kodak for quite a few years, and I was head of the special applications films, which you're going to be hearing all about. And this cartoon, I don't know how many of you read Pickles. Pickles is the best cartoon going. Anyhow, Opal is saying to her grandson, "Ha, look at Grandpa. He fell asleep reading a magazine upside down." And there's Earl reading a magazine. And then she says to the grandson, she says, "This is a Kodak moment if I ever saw one." And he says, "Ha, ha, ha, that sure is a great Kodak moment." Then he turns around to her and Grandpa is sleeping, turns around to Grandma and he says, "What's a Kodak?" I'm going to assume that all of you in this audience know what a Kodak is. Go ahead, Steve. Making film is not easy. It's a very complicated process. A lot of you know a lot about it. I've got some friends here who will correct me. I'm going to give you a short version of how film is made. You get big pots, put the right chemicals in, you stir them up, then you get some clear plastic sheeting, and you coat the stuff onto the clear plastic sheeting. And then you dry it, and then you cut it. Some into strips, some into sheets. You send it on to customers. Now, isn't that simple? If you want to know more, I wrote a book a few years ago. Carol's going to get mad at me, but I'm going to come over here. I wrote a book called Team Zebra, and there's a whole chapter on how to make film, and it's much more detailed than I just gave you. Okay, we're going to be talking mainly about film and my experiences as they relate to the space program today. Go ahead, Steve. I've got a lot of stuff to cover, but I'm only going to talk about the programs for NASA, which you've been hearing all about the last few days in the press. But I'm really going to talk about the satellite programs and the secret flight programs and flight aircraft. And I'm going to describe what they are. The outfit I was associated with made all the films for all these programs. So go ahead, Steve. The first I'm going to talk about is Lunar Orbiter. Lunar Orbiter was a series of satellites that Kodak built. And in conjunction with Boeing, they flew. 5 of them flew. The 6th is in a museum in Rochester. But the Lunar Orbiter was designed to take pictures of the moon so landing spots could be identified after they had decided that they were going to the moon. We were going to the moon. And they were all very successful. They built beautiful satellites. They took wonderful pictures. It's called, show some more of the pictures. This is the one, the 6th one is in the George Eastman House, the museum in Rochester. If you get there, it's wonderful to see. Not much bigger than a basketball, if you exclude the power panels. Go ahead, one more. It's commonly called the drugstore satellite because the film was all processed in the satellite and the pictures were transmitted to Earth. And we made special film that was soaked with chemicals, the right chemicals to process the film. And after the pictures were developed, they were spread apart, and through telemetry they were sent to Earth. It was also the first time we used ultrasonic splicing, which is hammering the film together so it wouldn't come apart. I was involved with this for 2 years, mainly 66 and 67, when all of this was done. Go ahead, Steve. The pictures were like this. This is the first picture of Earth taking from the moon. And the pictures were of such high quality that they were 10 times better than telescopes could provide at the time. And they led them to decide where to land. So that was a very successful program. Go ahead. The one we're all talking about these days is Apollo. And all of you might know that Apollo, I'm of Greek descent, so I'm up on this God stuff. Apollo was the son of Zeus. And as I try to find out what he was God of, he seems to have been God of everything. But he really was God of a sun and light. And anyhow, that's how he got named. So we're going to talk about it. The films that were used by the Apollo astronauts, the still films, were pretty standard film for Kodak. If any of you were around at the time and had your picture taken professionally, you probably had it taken with the same kind of film, called Ektachrome professional film. And some of the pictures that I have displayed here are the result of pictures they took. After the astronauts came back, and the 50th anniversary would be tomorrow, that's when they came back, Kodak, in conjunction with NASA, posted 5 beautiful pictures in Grand Central Station, and I have copies of them here. I think I have pictures too. The pictures are not as good as the copies. You're welcome to come up and see all of the displays. This is Edwin Aldrin, the second man on the moon, getting out of the lander, and he took his step, and as he took it, he got out, and Neil was already there. Neil took the picture, and you probably have read, you might have read that he said at the time, what spectacular desolation. That's how he described it. So everyone knows the first saying on the moon, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind, but he said the second one. Go ahead, Steve. They planted the flag, and that was a big event. Many of the conspiracy people think that how could the flag be waving when there's no atmosphere in the moon? Well, they had a pole that they put up here. I think it was a crossbar, and they did that at the time they put the film up. It was a beautiful tribute, and again, this is a picture that Neil took. Okay, another one. This is loading equipment off of the lunar lander. This is some of the testing equipment that was left on the moon. Earthquake devices, meteor testing devices, all kinds of things that were experimentals. They were on the moon for about 2 hours, and they did a lot of work. They were on the moon totally about a day, but they were out of the lander on the surface for about 2 hours. Go ahead, Steve. This is the most famous picture, and the real one is a lot better. But you'll see that that's Neil right there, and that's the lunar lander right there in Aldrin's visor. This is the camera. It's the Hasselblad camera that they used, and it did not have a way to trigger the pictures. They had to practice and be trained on how to take pictures without the camera here, and I think they had some kind of a device in their very heavy gloves that allowed them to take pictures. It took about 100 pictures, 108, I think it was, 109, go ahead. This is a iconic picture. And this is the picture. Can we have music, please?
Maybe not. Fly me to the moon.
See, I told you my wingman would cover for me. But you heard Fly Me to the Moon when you came in. And this picture was not taken by the Apollo 11 astronauts. It was taken by the Apollo 8 astronauts, who were two missions before the landing. And it was an accident, actually. They were coming home. They had not looked towards Earth once all the time they were there. They were going around the moon many times, and on the last time as they were headed home, one of them looked out the window and he said, "Look at that." And that's what they saw. And that's called the giant blue marble, and it's really the first time people realized that we looked like that, blue. Because all the artists of the previous years had painted the moon as brown or green or something other than blue. Anyhow, this is a beautiful picture, and we all remember it. Go ahead. A lot of people still don't believe we went. We went 6 times. 12 people walked on the moon. This is a photograph of the moon in 1996 by the reconnaissance orbiter, which was sent back to the moon. And they went over Tranquility Basin and they took pictures of the lunar module which was left and all the equipment that they had left in the testing. So you can still say that was doctored, but believe me, it wasn't doctored. We went. Thank you, Steve. And how many of you are golfers? Oh my goodness, we've got a lot of golfers in the group. Did you play that?
It should come
All
out.
right. That's Alan Shepard playing golf on the moon. His first shot didn't go far, like one of mine. His second shot went 600 yards, and it's been calculated that a good golfer, if Tiger Woods was up there, he could shoot it 2 miles. It's because of the lack of gravity and the lack of atmosphere. So that's the moonshot. Go ahead, Steve. Let's move on. This is my favorite picture. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's taken from Apollo 17. Gene Cernan was the last man to walk on the moon. And this is his golf cart. They had a device, a buggy that took them around so they could see really a lot of the land. But it's almost the total Earth with the sun on the side of the picture when it was taken. This is not a Photoshop picture. This is actually a picture, and it's my favorite. Now I know a lot of you play Trivial Pursuit, so I'm going to give you some Trivial Pursuit to remember and know by. Are you ready?
Ready.
I want you to keep score because this is the pop quiz. And as I tell these off, I want you to keep score of how many you knew about. And then we're going to have a contest as to who knew the most. Okay, the first is, you know they almost didn't make it in Apollo 11. They ran out of fuel and they had to change directions because they were going to land in a boulder field. And they ended up having to go farther than they expected, and they only had seconds of fuel lift. The estimate is 30 seconds, some say 15 seconds, some say 40 seconds. When Neil Armstrong was asked about it, his favorite quote was, "Well, you know, when it says empty on your gas tank, you always have a couple of gallons left." The second one is, do you know the range of temperatures on the moon? Well, without the spacesuits, they had to contend with minus 250 degrees in the shade and plus 250 degrees in the sunlight. So I don't want to hear anyone complaining about our heat down here again. The spacesuits were able to handle that. They were made with 17 to 19 layers of fabric. It was very sophisticated. They were very heavy, but of course gravity on the moon is 1/6 that it is on the Earth, so it didn't weigh much to them. And as you might know, you might not know, who the principal vendor was for making the spacesuits. It was a company called Playtex. Playtex was supreme in making brassieres and girdles, and they were brought into play to make the spacesuits, to help sew them. Number 3, President Nixon was the president when Apollo 11 happened. He had a letter ready, he had a speech ready in case they didn't make it. He practiced it, and it's available now, it's in the archives, but it's what they were going to say to the widows, what they were going to say to the nation had they not made it. They did figure, a lot of people calculated that they only had 1/3 of a chance, 1 in 3 of making it successfully and getting back. And I never realized that was so low. 1/5 of the Earth's population saw it live on TV. The TV was a black and white feed. Our pictures were the color. You have your own pictures that were taken that you will see. But the TV pictures that you saw, how many of you watched the moon landing? Oh. I did. I watched it with these two, my 2 daughters, one was in my lap and one was next to me, and we watched the whole thing. I told them how important it was, and they remembered. Let's see, about 400,000 workers were estimated to have helped them get to the moon. I think that number is low. I don't think I was counted. I think these were government workers and contractors who were kind of full-time on the Apollo project. I was part-time. As you'll hear later in my presentation, you will hear I was doing other things, so I don't think I was counted. But anyhow, 400,000, that's a lot. Did you know that the 2 astronauts, Armstrong and Aldrin, were standing in the LEM as they landed and standing when they took off? In all the pictures, a lot of you are shaking your heads, you did know that. A lot of people who have seen all the photographs, and we have so much video these days of it, they don't show them standing, but they were. Okay, how about the first man to take a pee on the moon? That was Aldrin. Before he stepped out of the LM to go join Neil Armstrong, he eliminated, and he is very proud of it. In his book, he wrote a whole chapter on how he eliminated before he stepped on the moon. In addition to that, a lot of people don't know that he took communion. He self-took communion on the lunar module before he stepped on the moon. Very religious man. This is a good one. When it was time to come back, and they were headed back to the command module, the 2 that were on the moon, they discovered that the button to start the engine that would take them back to the moon had fallen off. Talk about panic. 1 engine, 1 button, and they were somewhere. It had dropped off, knocked off. Well, they being smart guys, we didn't send dummies to the moon, used a fountain pen and pushed the button, and fortunately the switch was still okay. The button had just dropped off. That's how they got back. A lot of people don't know that. Anybody who's a member of this club would know that, because Fred Weldon told us that in the last presentation.
He broke the button getting out.
Oh, did they? They did? That's how they broke it? Okay. All right. A couple more. How many of you have heard the phrase, "We sent a man on the moon"? Why the hell can't we do that? Yes, I see nods. I remember that. That is a common phrase. And do you know about the plaque that they left on the moon? I think most people do. It said, "We came in peace for all mankind." That was left on the moon. How about the white mice? Do you know about the white mice? Well, they were put in isolation when they got back. And for 21 days they were quarantined because they were afraid that they might have caught something on the moon that would kill all mankind. They put them in with a whole bunch of white mice for 21 days. Fortunately, the white mice lived, and they did too. How about the Saturn V rocket, the big rocket with the F1 engines that took them to the moon? Do you know that it wasn't ready and it wasn't tested successfully until 2 years before this flight? It's unbelievable what was done in a very short period of time, because they were on this time schedule to get to the moon before the end of the decade. Neil was a fighter pilot, Neil Armstrong. He was a test pilot for the X-15, the fastest plane ever built. And he crashed in the lunar module during a test run and almost got killed. He was able to parachute out at 200 feet and lived. And he didn't think anything of it. He got out, walked out, was carted back to where he was working, and he went back to work. Unbelievable. They brought 47 to 48 pounds of moon dust back, and that's a lot. At the last presentation I gave, there was a woman in the audience who had touched the moon rock. And a final one, the Soviets were losing the space race thanks to this, but they didn't give up. They knew we were going to the moon, so they sent a satellite called Luna, L-U-N-A, to the moon, and it was designed with a robot to scoop rock out of the moon and bring it back. Unfortunately for them, it got there okay, but it crashed. True story. Check it out. Okay, that's enough on the moon. I'm going to move quickly to a bunch of planes and satellites that I helped provide film for. This is the U-2, and I think everyone's has heard of the U-2. It was the bulwark of the spy planes used during the Cold War. To its credit, it was built in the late 50s in the Skunk Works in Lockheed, and today it is still flying. It's still being used. I can't tell you this officially because I'm not cleared and I don't know, but I suspect a lot of the North Korean peninsula is being photographed by that plane. We made film for it. The film was 9.5 inches wide, varying lengths from 10,000 feet up to 15,000 feet. A lot of pictures taken, and only one crash, the one you know about in Russia, Soviet Union, Gary Powers crashed and was captured. The other one was over Cuba during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and Major Anderson was killed in that one. Thank you. These are some photographs from the U-2 of where a lot of the film came from, Rochester, New York area. This is when we were experimenting with color film. Color film didn't work out too well. We lost a lot of the definition, and we went back to black and white. But some tests were made, and I managed to get that picture, and I think the next picture which had my house, our house on it, right up there in the corner. And when I was talking to the analysts and they wanted to know where I lived, this was before Google Earth, and I told them where I lived, and they said, "Oh, you have a pool?" And yeah, I said, "Yeah." But everybody has a pool. I wasn't so amazed. And then they said, they looked harder and they said, "Oh, and you have a red and yellow ball and a blue and white ball in the pool." And they were right. That tells you how good they were. Wonderful pictures. The successor to the U-2 was the SR-71 called the Blackbird. It was much faster, flew much higher. The U-2 flew at 70,000 feet. The SR-71 flew at 90,000 feet. I have photographs from some of them, and it was amazing. It has been retired. You can see it in museums. It did not fly over the Soviet Union at all, but it did do service in the Middle East, the Far East, Cuba, and took wonderful pictures. It was never down. It was a plane that was shot at many times, but it never hit the ground. And the reason? Well, they saw the SAMs, surface-to-air missiles, being fired at it, and they outran him. That's how fast this plane was. This plane could go from coast to coast in little more than an hour, like an hour and 5 minutes. Wouldn't you like that when you're long travels? Thank you. Satellites that replaced the planes and flew over the areas that we had been taking pictures with planes are, I'm going to cover 3 of them. There were many of them. We made the film for all of them, and it was very exciting work. We could not talk at all about this. All very black projects, very secret. The first one is Corona. If any of you get to the Washington Museum, there's a wonderful exhibit of Corona. The film in it was 2 rolls of 70 millimeters by 10,000, 15,000 feet, and it took amazing pictures. There were like 50 missions of this, mostly over the Soviet Union, some over China, some over the Koreas, and some over the Middle East. But it did a lot of the work after the planes were not to fly over hostile territory. The most amazing thing I can talk about to you, and all the groups I talk to, all wonder, how did the film come back? How did you get the pictures? And here's the answer. They were ejected from the satellites, and they were captured by planes in nets.
Oh my God.
This is a C-119. This is the capsule, a film. This is the net. And they were parachuted down. When an interesting sidelight is when the astronauts landed by parachute. A lot of this technology was worked out for secret spy planes. We have better pictures of that. Steve and I dug up this one. That's the satellite. That's the bucket. They were called buckets, and that came down. Another one. I think we have another picture. Isn't that amazing? That's the bucket. That's the payload. At first, they didn't catch all of them, so the Navy had to fish them out. And one of them, the Navy was unable to fish out, and it went to the deepest part of the Pacific Ocean. But it was recovered. The Navy sent a submersible to it and went down some 15,000 feet and fished it out, brought it to us. Guess what? The film was all eaten up. We got no pictures from that one. By the end of the programs, I'm going to talk about 2 more satellite programs which also use this method of recovering film. They were so good at this that they didn't miss. Almost all the buckets that were ejected were captured successfully. And they came back to us at the Rochester Kodak division. We called it Hawkeye. It had a code name of Bridgehead. And Bridgehead was the building that was at the corner of the Driving Park Bridge and St. Paul Boulevard, and here was the Genesee River. The top 3 stories of this building were used to process the film, make the copies, and send them to the intelligence agencies and the people who could do it. All very classified, all very secret. People lived in Rochester and drove by this building many times, did not know this was going on. This was so secret that when George H.W. Bush was head of the CIA, he came to be toured and briefed on what we were doing. Well, he was snuck into Rochester on a secret CIA plane. He was transported from the airport to this facility in a secret CIA car. He was taken up to the 5th floor of this building in a freight elevator, and he was briefed on it. It was ultra secret and only became declassified in 2016. But that was the center of the spy world. We called it the Spook House, because that's what it was. I see Lindsay there, and he knew about it. I don't think you worked on it, but you knew about it. Okay?
What was the size of the film?
I'm going to talk about that. Could you wait just a minute? Yes. No, I'm serious. I'm going to cover that. It's a good question. This is a museum in Dayton. Have any of you been there? It's the Space Museum. It's wonderful. I really recommend it if you're in the Midwest, if you're anywhere near Ohio, try to get there. It's free. It has, it used to have 3 hangars full of memorabilia. It now has 4 hangars full of memorabilia. All the way from the Wright brothers kind of planes to current drones and all these spy satellites. It's very, very worthwhile making the visit. Well, Kathy and I went for a couple hours and we spent the whole day. I had trouble getting out of there. There's so much to see. Go ahead, Steve. I'm going to move on to 2 other satellites, and then I promise to take your questions, and I'm sorry to put you off, but I'm going to answer that question. The 2 satellites that were the most sophisticated and were the last 2 film satellites ever made by the country were Gambit, made by Kodak. It flew 9.5 inches of film, about 15,000 feet long, maybe longer as the film got thinner. And it took pictures in very specific areas in very, very high detail. And it was very good at it because we were able to find out what was going on in the world. This was the Cold War period when we were not sure we were going to blow each other up with atomic weapons or who had what and who was doing what. And there was a lot of chest thumping about what people could do, and we had to know whether it was right or not. This satellite was a marvel of technology and could take pictures that could identify targets to within 6 inches, almost anywhere in the world. And it too shot the film out of the satellite. It was recovered. It was taken to that facility I told you about, and onto the photo analyst. Steve, the next one you've heard of, and we have somebody here from PerkinElmer. It was Hexagon. Hexagon was the size of a school bus. I'm not kidding. This is a person, and the satellite was some 30 feet long, 10 feet around, many, many thousands of pounds. Unbelievable technology. The next picture shows it in a little more detail. This is a schematic. This is the length of it. It says length 60 feet. I said that wrong. Diameter 10 feet, weight 30,000 pounds. It had panoramic cameras. These were the film recovery buckets. After the pictures were taken, they were rolled into these buckets and sent to Earth to be recovered, as I told you they were recovered. This is a picture of it being ready to be loaded on a rocket. They were fired from Vandenberg Air Force Base, as was Gambit, and this is just getting ready to go on a Titan 3C, which was some of you may have worked on it or knew about it. There were 20 of these flights, and 19 of them were successful. The last one blew up on the launch pad. But many, many pictures, and when Ronald Reagan used to talk about trust but verify, we had the responsibility for verify. That's what we did. Okay? Film rolls, film length, and what they look like. This is what the rolls that were in hexagon look like. This is a man, about 6 feet. That's a roll of film. They started out at 100,000 feet. They ended up at 155,000 feet, over 30 miles. 2 rolls per mission. 2 of these flew on one of those huge hexagon buses. And this is the way they were made. This is the way they were loaded. They were loaded on these containers. Did Phyllis get here, Sally? I see. You can tell her you saw a container for Mercury Aircraft in Hammondsport, New York. That was the containers. And this unloaded. Of course, we did all that in the dark. I'm not kidding. We did all our work in the dark. So if you were amazed about catching the film out of the airplanes, be amazed that we did all our work in the dark. Film cannot be exposed to light. Thank you. This is a little what it looked like, 6.6 inches. Again, this is the 5-foot roll, one of them here, one of them here. You folks who worked at Perkin-Elmer, a couple of you, I think, at least 2 I see there. Amazing technology, amazing technology. Perkin-Elmer went on to build the Hubble after this, using a lot of the technology that was built for Hexagon. I just marvel at it. Instead of the specific pictures that Gambit took, this satellite took pictures on a broader range, and it was able to map the whole Soviet Union almost every couple of days. So we knew what was happening, how many satellites they had, where they were positioned, how many planes they had, and we didn't have to rely on what they said, which was a lot more than they had. We knew exactly what they had. And when all the talks were going on about denuclearization and heaven forbid we shoot at each other, we knew a lot more. Some people say we knew a lot more than they did, and some people say that these programs helped prevent World War III. That's speculative, but could be. Thank you. Here's another picture of the film. When we got to Dayton, Kathy and I got very excited because I had never seen any of the film since I had worked on it. And this was 25 years later. And there was some film on exhibit in the museum. So I began telling the guys about the program, and I told them a little bit about what I knew, much more than they knew. And as my wife will vouch for me, they almost gave me a job. They wanted me to be a guide. I decided the Villages was better than Dayton, Ohio. So here I am. The final thing I'm going to talk about, and I haven't gotten a signal yet. My wife says I talk too much. I get very excited about this, but I have up here the only award that I got for this. The work was so secret there really were no awards. But after Apollo 11 came back to Earth, the photo people gave us plaques, those of us who worked on it, that included a piece of film that's up there. It's hard to see. It's a piece of film that was on the moon during Apollo 11, and it says, all the things that happened during Apollo 11, which you've been hearing about the last few days, and it's signed by Collins, Armstrong, and Aldrin. And I'm going to, my grandchildren, I've got a lot of other stuff that I'd like you to come up, feel free to come up and look at this. But I'm going to give a lot of this stuff to my grandchildren to take care of. And they're going to share it with all their brothers and sisters. And I'm very proud of this. Okay, one more, Steve? My reflections before we get to questions. It was very exciting work, but it was hard. I did not have a lot of travel, but I had odd hours. We had emergencies almost always for 10 years. I left this work and went to other work at Kodak. But I'm glad I was in it. It was very difficult not to talk about it. Any of you who were in space work or secret work know how difficult it was not to talk about it. Thank goodness we had NASA. The NASA stuff was open. It was an open book to the public, and it was easy to discuss it, to explain it to people. But the spy work could not be talked about. I'm kind of disappointed about the current state of space. It's been 50 years since this happened. 50 years. Aviation, manned flight was only 50 years old when this happened. Photography was only 100 years old when this happened. We've gone another 50 years, and I've lived it, you've lived it. I have a hard time being proud of what's been done. I cringe when we bum a ride to the space station with the Russians. I cringe every time I hear it. However, I've got to be honest, it is getting better. I think the privatization of a lot of the effort will help, and we seem to be doing more, at least talking more. But I suspect China, India, others will beat us back to the moon and maybe to Mars. I hope I'm wrong, and I hope we get there first. Finally, I'm very proud to have contributed. As you can tell, I'm very proud to be able to talk about it to you. So I talk to anyone who listens now. The days of having to keep quiet are gone. And Kathy says I talk too much about it. She knew about it because I talk in my sleep. I'd be glad to take some questions from you. Yes. One right here, the hand came up first.
On hexagon, what were the size of the optical apertures on that?
Well, we got some people from Perkin-Elmer who can probably tell you.
24 inches. 24 inches.
24 inches.
140. Yes.
When a rocket went up loaded with film to be exposed, probably at some kind, how do you know, how was the timing done so that you weren't taking pictures, wasting film, taking pictures over clouded areas?
Oh, they could take pictures right through clouds. Yeah. They had a mapping camera that helped guide them. The electronics, although not as sophisticated as today's electronics for taking pictures, was very sophisticated for telling them where they were. And when they would sweep over the parts of the earth they wanted pictures of, they knew it, and they knew what time of day the pictures would come out the best. And besides that, even if the pictures weren't perfect, we knew how to enhance them during processing. That was photoshopping before photoshopping was invented. Yes?
What do you know about the capabilities that the Russians had at this time of taking pictures of us? Do you know anything about that?
Not too much, but I imagine they were doing the same things, and I imagine they were not as good as we were at it. At that time, I don't know about today. I'd have to guess. And if I really knew, I'd have to shoot you after I told you. Yes?
Yes, I'm curious, where was the camera positioned to take pictures of Neil Armstrong coming over?
Oh, There were two cameras. There was the TV camera, which you saw.
Which was attached to the.
It was attached to the limb, and it was fixed. It did not move. It may have moved some, but not a lot. The cameras that I showed on the spacesuit of the two guys that were walking were on their chest, and they had to point it. And I really don't know the details of how they took the pictures. There was no clicker. They had to point, and they had some way of activating to take the 105 pictures, 108 pictures. Yes.
On the lunar rover that they drove on the moon, do you have any of the pictures that the astronauts took of the vehicle and them driving it?
Question, did we have pictures of the lunar rover being driven? Well, I don't know. I think it led to the golf carts down here, but I haven't seen a lot of pictures, but there had to be some, because when they went on the lunar rover, and it was on the later Apollo flights, only one of the two astronauts that was on the moon at the time went on the lunar rover, and I think the other one did take pictures, but I have not seen them.
I worked on lunar rover.
Oh, wonderful.
On the development of the brake system and steering.
Wonderful.
And the suspension system, but the astronauts, two of them that were on there, were hot rodding on the moon, and they had their own pictures of that, and they hit a rock, and that's how the fender came off that Boeing got blamed for.
Did you all hear that? This gentleman worked on the rover, and he heard that the astronauts were hot rodding and maybe busted up one of the rovers and lost a lot of the pictures. It could be. I don't know much about that. That was Apollo 16 and Apollo 17 mainly.
Yeah.
Yeah, right? That's where the two rovers were? Yeah. Okay, other questions? Yes, over here, you were up here
To
first.
get those beautifully clear pictures, how much processing was done on them to get them like that?
Why, I'll tell you, the ones the astronauts took from space, there's not much between space and where they took the pictures. They're pretty clear, but I'm sure they were doctored for density, and they were enhanced to the level they could be. I'm not aware, but some of the pictures are just great. Please help yourself to see some of them up here. I also have pictures from yesterday's exhibit in Washington, D.C. We had a neighbor, I don't think Faith and Manny made it. No, there's Faith. Faith, tell them what you saw yesterday.